Okay, welcome to the 80th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm excited to be speaking to Paul Hughes. Paul has degrees in geography and ICT. He has spent much of his teaching career as head of ICT and other departments. He now runs Parent Guide to GCSE with his wife Emily, which coaches parents in how to support their children through their teenage years. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much for having me on. Excited to talk.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking to you as well. So I'd love how I begin the podcast is for you to explore a little bit. How did you get into the work you now do? I'd love to hear a backstory.
I try and make it really sort of brief, but I used to work in banking. In fact, I spent so many years at university. I think I did about 10 years in between first university, a bit of time off, doing a master's degree. I kind of then went traveling. I didn't start working until I was about 27 or so. Started working in banking in Peterborough, then went down to London, then went to Frankfurt. Then my wife fell pregnant with twins and came back to London. And once they'd been born, I just wasn't seeing them. They were always asleep because the London commute from Peterborough takes ages, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, what can I go into that is going to give me more time with the family? And it seems ridiculous to me now that I came up with the answer being teaching. So I trained as a teacher, gave me perfect opportunity to spend lots of time with the boys in the first. In fact, I took a year off basically to be the sort of the full-time stay-at-home parent. Once they went to nursery school, that's when the teacher training started. And I did 16 years of teaching, and probably for the first 10 of it, absolutely loved it. Best job in the world. Would never discourage anyone from doing following that profession. But then it just changed, and I happily talk about why I think it changes the whole academisation thing. We went from being a college to being an academy, same as many other schools. We're being pressured by local authorities and the government to go down that route, and everything changed. It went from being a great job to being one that I started to loathe. So me and my wife, we'd done 30 years between us in the classroom. We worked at the same school, met on the same day. Our first day at school was it was her first day as well at the same school. And we're just talking one day about, and Emily had a couple of bad bosses as well at different schools. And, do we want to keep doing this until we're 67 or whatever the current retirement age is? And as a 40 something at the time, I think we were both saying this is hard now. What's it going to be like when we're 25 years older and we're still chasing our tail, doing the insane hours that it requires to be an effective head of department classroom teacher as we were? And that's where the idea of Parent Guide came from, because we started talking about the skills we had. We saw a gap in the market and started sort of planning basically, and that's where Parent Guide to GCSE and then subsequently Parent Guide to post 16. That's a family of parent guides now. That's where it came from.
Thank you, Paul. That's interesting. So what year was that when you said the first 10 years? When did the change to academies come in?
I can't remember the dates of academisation when it first came in. Some schools went immediately. If you're a really good school, you didn't have to. If you're a school that was in a little bit of trouble with Ofsted, for example, then there was a bit more pressure to have a kind of an academy sponsor, and that's the situation my school was in. So I'm going to go with roughly around 2015. And it was we got a brand spanking new building out of it. We went from this crusty, dilapidated but fabulous building that I think most of the people who work there loved working in, despite the fact you might get rained on whilst teaching. So we've got this fantastic new build, but with the new build came the new way of managing schools, I guess, and it just turned into, it's just something I don't understand. I don't understand why why academisation was necessary. I know it's a financial thing. I absolutely understand that. But it went from being all about the students to all about kind of bottom line, I think, and a lot less money going into the system.
Thank you. Thank you. So how did teaching change then?
if you think about austerity, let's start with that. And I'm not going to go into some sort of political rant, but as a public servant, no different to nurses and doctors, dentists, police as well. Whatever public service you can think of, pay stopped progressing. And I've always thought as a teacher in Peterborough that I was well paid. I never had an issue with it. We would always get the 2% every year on year, and what have you. But then for 3 or 4 years, there was no pay progression at all, literally no pay rise, similar to, again, other public services. And at the same time, with this whole academisation thing coming in, essentially, the amount that schools had to spend also just started being reduced. It was just a consistent squeeze on everything. I'll give an example, probably the best example of how it impacted directly on the students. We used to do an end of term post-16 trip, and we went somewhere fantastic. We got on a coach, and we went to somewhere, Fine Shades Wood, and we kind of walked around and did team building exercises. It was good preparation for sixth form life. And we did that every year as a tried and tested, did what it needed to do. It was always enjoyed by staff and students alike. And then we couldn't afford to do that because we couldn't afford the bus. So we then started going on a bus. Well, we could afford a bus, but it was a bus to a local park. So that was a reduction. And then because it's still in Peter, it's not as cool. The kids don't enjoy it as much. It's places they've been before during their free time. And then we couldn't even afford to do that. So it went from sort of an away day to a close away day to a nothing day. And that is purely to do with the amount of money available to spend on students, not on teachers, to make them, feel part of the school and integrate into sixth form life. And it's just, and that's just one tiny symptom of the bigger picture.
Thank you, Paul. So one of the things we spoke about when we spoke about a month ago about what to speak about, we realized this difference between public school and private school education system and the state school. I'm speaking to someone next week who's kind of written a paper about this, looking at all the research. I don't know if you can read that, but why are some children worth more than others, by Dr. Sol Gamsu. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about that. What's the difference between private school education system and the state school system? What was it like spending time in each of those environments?
Yeah, well, I've never taught in the private school environment, but I was a private or public school boy, as they called them at the time. So I've got experience of both. Obviously, my education back in the day, that was in the 80s, I guess. And it was, but also it's worth saying that my boys went to a private school as well. Excuse me. And it's very easy to see, in many respects, nothing has changed. It's just the sheer amount of money that goes into providing for each student to make sure they have the best possible experience at school was absolutely frightening at a private school. The amount spent on sport, the amount spent on arts, the extracurricular activities that go into making a rounded education. It's not about maths and English and science. It's about all the fabulous stuff that happens on the periphery that makes people what they are. And my old school had an amazing theatre. It was a theatre. It had all the lights, all the sound booths, all the proper comfy seating, hundreds of seats, and huge amounts of money thrown at each production. And they were centerpieces of what the school did, completely aside of the academic achievement. Whereas you go to a state school and I'm talking about the school I was at, but I think this is similar story elsewhere. Things like the arts, I think, and probably sport to an extent, are the things that are suffering, because as funding reduces slowly but surely, no matter what anyone says, in council or in government, the amount of money spent per person, per student is reducing year on year. And it just restricts the kind of the extracurricular offerings, the things that really make students enjoy going to school. I mean, I was a sportsman. That's all I did. Rugby, swimming, cricket, squash, everything that I could get involved in, football. There was a team available, there were trips available, there was a match every weekend, sometimes midweek. That's all I did. I did a bit of work as well, but it was just such a rich feast of what do you want to improve at? What do you want to sort of be interested in? Is this something that you're going to take forward to a career, to university? All the opportunities were there, whereas at the state school level, those opportunities simply year on year are reducing, and to the point where I think arts are going to be in trouble. And it's not just me saying that. That's you can read about it in most newspapers how funding for arty type subjects are reducing.
Thank you, Paul. Fascinating. Yeah, it's interesting reading Dr. Gamsu's paper. He's saying that I think in private schools the amount available, don't quote me on this, but it's around 18,000 per pupil. In state schools, I think it's 5,600 or 5,700 per pupil. And there's quite a big difference.
Absolutely. It's not even comparable, is it? And that 5,000, wherever that figure came from, sometimes some students bring more money with them if they've got a special educational need, for example. So it's not a standard figure. I'd imagine many students would be a good bit less than that, with a few students being a little bit more than that. So that's probably the average, I guess.
Yeah. You're saying that's the average. I mean, what he was doing was comparing the mean. So for example, Eton, he was looking at the local schools to Eton, the difference. So I think Eton's was 10 times more money in Eton per pupil than the local comprehensive. I think Marlborough College, you might have got that wrong, but I think it was 14 times more.
Yeah.
And
one thing I would say about that, if we go with the 5,500 figure, and that's obviously to pay for buildings, to pay for teachers, pays for everything essentially. One of the massive spends that school have these days that they didn't used to have is to do with cover teachers, because teacher retention and recruitment is such a huge issue in many parts of the country, that often a student will be in a class with a cover teacher or with a supervisor who isn't a teacher. They're literally just to keep the students in the class, give them the work that's been set by somebody else. There is no teaching happening. But those cover teachers cost a huge amount of money. The agencies charge a lot of money, and obviously the actual teacher, the cover teacher themselves, comes in from an agency. They get a reasonably decent day rate, but it's a way more than a normal teacher would cost to employ. And because retention recruitment is such a problem, school budgets are being swallowed by this huge issue of we're 10 teachers down today. You phone up the supply agency, 10 teachers in, please. I don't know the figures, but you're not going to get much less than £300 a day to the agency. Whatever the teacher gets is a whole different discussion. But certainly it's a bit like the NHS. You hear stories of doctors costing £2,000 a day to get him to cover a strike or something. They're being hired through agencies, and there's a huge amount to the doctor and there's a huge amount to the agency. Add them together, and that causes funding problems. And it's a day in, day out. And my old school is no different from any other. That recruiting, retaining teachers is a huge problem.
Thank you. So it might be worth. I was at a conference last weekend with boarding school survivors support. There's about 100 people there, and talking about private and boarding school. To give figures, is that it's 1% boarding school of people in this country go to boarding school, and it's another 6% who are in private school. So it's only 7% out of, so it's 93%. We're talking about that figure of 5,500.
Yep. Yeah, it's scary figures.
Yeah, it is, especially when we realize how many of our leaders, 63% of High Court judges were at boarding school.
Yeah.
75% of Liz Truss's government were a boarding school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You see Liz Truss wasn't, but you can see, okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, everyone knows about the connection between certain high-profile public schools and yeah, the higher states of office, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's Eton has 20 prime ministers, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that. So I guess then we could segue into, what was your boarding school like? What was your public school like?
Because I've just spoken glowingly about the opportunities that it provided. And if anyone said, how do you look back on your private school education? I think I generally enjoyed it. I mean, it was an odd thing because my parents lived in Hong Kong at the time, and so therefore I was at boarding school, and it was an RAF situation where they pay a good bit of the fees, etc. But I went there when I was 10, which to me as a parent now, sort of waving your child off at the age of 10, saying, right, I'll see you in 3 or 4 months is a bizarre thing. But I think that was more of an accepted thing in the RAF and maybe back in the 80s. And I did enjoy school, but it's bizarre that bullying was absolutely horrendous. It was just shocking. And I obviously I'm not going to name names, but I remember the names of those responsible to this day, and I see them pop up on Facebook, not necessarily as a friend of mine, but as somebody you might know. It's like, well, I do know you. I know exactly the sorts of things you got up to, and that I'm sure they know who they are and what they did and what it was completely ridiculous. But yeah, I sort of look back on it now, thinking about the stories you hear in the press. Nikki Campbell, I think, is a high profile sort of personality who's come out recently and explained some of the abuses that happened at his private school. And so I think it makes where it certainly made me question what happened and the things that you heard about going on. And my school was no different at all to all these other stories I've heard of. Some of the things that are coming out between friends, nothing. I've never seen anything in the press, but it was horrendous. Some of the teachers, bearing in mind I've been in the as a teacher in the school system, and the amount of effort put into child protection, rightly so, it is enormous. That is the first, last, and only thing on every teacher training day is child protection. How can we make sure this is absolutely watertight? And but back in the day, I don't think that child protection wasn't a concept, because some of these things just simply wouldn't happen. So, yeah, I survived it, but I know of friends who were abused. There's no polite way of putting it. So yeah, I enjoyed my time there, but I know full well that there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by the school.
Thank you. What would you change in that system, having been in that system? And I know it has changed a lot. I still hear reports, that certain things haven't changed in these schools. And these are, so obviously you're not been teaching there, but
I'll be surprised if with my state school, this absolute full-on child protection being the most important thing. I would imagine that 99% of public schools that is the case as well. I'd be amazed if that, because if nothing else, I suspect there's litigation going on all over the place, which isn't necessarily publicised, but these schools have definitely got a case to answer. So therefore their policies will be an awful lot tighter. So I suspect the changes that needed to be made have been made. If that isn't the case, I would be very surprised, very disappointed, because it's going to open up a can of worms, but at some point for them. So
thank you. I mean, my next question is, what is currently not working in the modern education system?
We said we could talk for an hour.
That's fine.
I think a lot of it is to do with funding and teacher recruitment, retention. Those are the two issues that I think I don't see an easy solution to them. And you can talk about governments and potential change of government in the next year or so. But it's to do with funding. I think the teacher recruitment crisis is very well documented. It is a thing. The government keeps throwing lots of cash at different sort of shortage subjects. That's how I got into computer teaching. Is that got a degree in computing, and at the time I can't remember the incentive, but certainly there was extra cash available for me if I qualified as an IT computer science teacher. And that continues to be the case, whether it be physics, whether it be whatever the shortage subject is. But it's to do with, I think it goes back to austerity, because teachers weren't given pay rises for many years. And I can't remember the stats, but I seem to think certainly it was 3 years on the trot with no pay rise. And then occasionally it was just, a token gesture rather than actual. It was certainly a real terms pay cut for 8 years, 9 years on the trot. And that's eroded the starting salary of a teacher. So if you finish school and you're going to university and you're thinking, right, or you finish university, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to train to be a teacher and get paid 27, 28 grand to start off with? Or do I want to go into a different sector, the private sector, and earn potentially 5, 6, 7, 10,000 pounds more as a starting salary? And increasingly, people are voting with their feet. And that I believe is first, last, and only the reason why teachers are harder to come by and harder to retain. Just to finish that, I know one example of a student who I used to teach. He then joined my school as a teacher on one of these kind of packages where if you do 5 years, I think at the end of each year you get a certain amount of cash, and it went up to about 20 grand. So on the first year you got 5 grand, the second year 2, 3, something like that, and then there's a final decent kick in the 5th year. And his kind of approach was all along that I'm going to take the 20 grand, and at 5 years I'm going to go and get a proper job, is what he called it. I think, so he was very clear. I'm going to take the teaching money. It's not a bad career to have in your CV. And then by the time he was probably 26, 27, his plan was to go and work elsewhere and earn proper money. So, and that's do you want to call it gaming the system? If the government are going to hand out 20 grand for doing 5 years of work in addition to your normal salary, then that's what some people are doing. So, it just causes problems. If you don't have a consistent teacher, students don't make as good a progress. If you've got a teacher one day and then the next day you've got the cover in, and then the day after that you've got that teacher's moved on. So between year 10 and year 11, for example, it's always good to have continuity of teachers. They know you know them. It's very difficult to do these days because the turnover of staff between schools is getting bigger and bigger year on year.
Thank you. I can't remember who it was. One of my guests did say that in primary schools you have the same teacher for all subjects, and then you go to secondary school and you are jumping from teacher to teacher, so you don't get that, on an attachment level. I've interviewed quite a few people about attachment theory, this idea you don't get attached to, you don't have a trust.
It's really tricky. I mean, I'll hold my hands up here and say, as a computer science teacher, in a year 7 class, for example, you only get 1 hour, 1 lesson of computer science a week. And I could have 10, 12 different classes. So, if you take 12 times by 30 in a class and do the maths, that's an awful lot of students. And half the time, it's very difficult to remember the names because you see them once a week. On day 1, you get to meet the naughty kids. I can remember those, pretty much the whole way through the year because they present themselves on day 1 as I'm here to push your buttons, sir. You also remember those who've got a bit about them, somebody who's either got an opinion but not naughty, or is just really brilliant, always got the hand up, just a fabulous student. And it's those in the middle. It's just, it's very easy for them to just, go through that the whole year and sitting there thinking, I think, yeah, I've got a seating plan. I think I know your name, but it just makes it really, really tricky. And so, yeah, you got 10 different classes. Half the time, if you're a decent student, you're not naughty, you're not brilliant, you may well go through the first few years of your school life, and all these teachers who do 1 hour a week type of subjects like myself probably don't know who you are. It's it's tricky.
Mm, that's because I presume it's almost 30 students in a class, so that's
Yeah.
300.
Almost exactly. It's very, very rare to be less than, and quite often it might be a couple over, which it shouldn't be. But if there's no other space, then yeah. And as a computer teacher, I'd have a class of 26 computers and 31 students. That's 5 people sharing. There's always going to be computers not working. That's 10 people shared. Just again, you go to a private school, the chances of computers not working are slim, I'd imagine. The budget to repair stuff, maintain stuff is far, far healthier.
Wow, wow. So is there anything else there about what's currently not working in the modern education system?
Well, yeah, I think, I mean, this is something that I wasn't as involved in, but in terms of child mental health, I think it's a huge issue. It's always been a huge issue. And not just mental health, actually. I'm going to extend it to any child with a special educational need, whether that be something to do with their mental health. And just again, I don't want to bang on about it, but it's to do with funding. It's to do with the amount of resource put to making sure that students are being given every opportunity to succeed. And I remember in my old school, we had a special educational needs department. We had a SENCO. The SENCOs are still a thing in schools, the special educational needs coordinator. But we had this brilliant SENCO, and she had a team of, I don't know, 20, 25 classroom assistants. They loved their job. They loved the students. They were, it was just, it kind of worked. It was, the students knew where they needed to go if they're having sort of one-on-one lessons, or the assistants knew where to go if they're going into a classroom to help a particular student who needed their help. And it was brilliant. And then we moved to this new building, new system, essentially, the Academy system. And from having a department that was aimed at looking after children with special educational needs, it kind of disappeared. It kind of, we still had a SENCO, but there was no sort of central point. And from being 20 or 25 people, you're down to sort of 15 people, and then 10 people, and then 8 people. And there's funding there for these students, but I'm not convinced that. In fact, I'm not convinced. I know that the funding isn't going to where it needs to go to help those students. Too often it's been diverted. I don't know if diverted is the right word. It's not reaching where it needs to be. And mental health, for example, if a child needs an assessment, there's just less money available, both in schools and in local authorities, to make sure that that assessment can happen quickly. Things like educational psychologists, very, 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 very hard to come by. And if they're harder to come by, each school is not going to get as much time with an educational psychologist to help the children who probably need the help. And so it goes on. Again, funding. And how would I fix it? Well, again, if there was to be a change of government, I think we know full well there's not a magic money tree that's suddenly going to spring up. I would not like to be the in tray of any new government. It's going to be a lot of things they need to do, and very, very, very little money to do it in.
Yeah, there's been one suggestion about taking away VAT. So at the moment, they don't have to pay VAT, certainly public schools. And I think there's also the charity side. They're still considered charities.
Yeah, I think all school fees are VAT exempt at the moment, but Labour have said very clearly that's going to change. So, which I think is only, using the term only loosely, only going to make 2 billion a year or something. Still a lot of money that can be hopefully diverted into, that they keep promising that money is going to go X, Y, and Z. It's going to be spread fairly thinly, I would imagine.
Mm.
Interestingly, though, and I might be wrong on this, but I'd heard on the grapevine that if you are a public school parent,
Mm.
um, and I think the writing's on the wall in terms of a potential government change in the next year or so. Schools are aware of this, and I think are basically giving parents the opportunity to pay fees up front. So if you are about to start at Eton and it costs you 40 grand a year or whatever, just the 40 grand, if you want to pay all 7 years up front, that's fine, because we can, the school can look after the money and what have you. And obviously, therefore, they're paying under the current terms, which is VAT exempt. Therefore, you're saving all that money. So I might be wrong, but that's a rumor I heard on a grapevine, which I guess from a school's point of view and from a parent point of view makes perfect sense. But certainly, it's going to be a tax dodge that probably I dare say is legal.
Right, I hadn't heard of that. I had heard of schools um, asking their teachers to vote Tory, public schools.
Yeah. Um, it wouldn't surprise me. It's easy to use the line, your job's on the line here, because inevitably, if that rise does come into effect, then it's going to make a fairly sizable impact on fees. So
Mm.
for some parents, it will make absolutely no difference because they're that rich. But I dare say there's a lot of parents out there who are putting their absolute everything into affording this education for their child or children, and it is going to be the thing that essentially means that the child can't continue there, which bizarrely then means that child's got to be catered for at a state school at the cost of 5,500 quid to the taxpayer. So it's horses for courses. I don't know the right answer. I'm not an economist, but I'm sure somebody's doing some maths somewhere to work out whether it's worth it.
Yeah, thank you. So what else would you change? I'm hearing funding. We need to get some funding, but it sounds like there's not much funding available. So in your eyes, how would you change it?
Can I rant about Ofsted, or is it too much of a rant already?
No,
I,
no, no, of
with
course.
Ofsted, I mean, I know that private schools have their own system, but with Ofsted, I don't understand necessarily what they do. It seems to be the Office for Terrorising Teachers. I had a head teacher back in 2007, and we failed an Ofsted inspection, and he was absolutely, he was raging. I've never seen any bloke so cross, frankly. And his point was, and it kind of stuck with me what he said. It's like, I know there's issues with our school. I'm fully aware of what they are, and I'm not happy about it. I don't need somebody to come in and say, you need to improve X, Y, and Z. And by the way, here's this millstone around your neck that's going to, you are a school that requires improvement or is in special measures, all those kind of things that just impact the local community, because parents then don't want to send their child to school with this kind of mark against their name. And and then it's just it's pressure on teachers to where you can have no notice inspections, and the inspectors can turn up on any day whatsoever, turn up at your door and expect bells and whistles, and it's just a system I don't think works. It's a system that requires a huge amount of money from the government, but it doesn't work. And what is the answer? I'm not going to come up and say I've got this genius idea, because I don't. But certainly sending teams of inspectors in to make judgments on one day, it's bizarre. I as a head of department, I sat in on joint inspection, so I would go and see a classroom teacher, and I would be there with an Ofsted inspector. And I knew that this teacher, for example, would mark books meticulously. They were amazingly marked. And the one thing the inspector sort of pulled out was like, the books haven't been marked for sort of 2 weeks or whatever. It's like, yeah, but if you look back at all the previous marking, the amount of feedback that this teacher gives is just it's sensational. I don't know how he has the time. And but that wasn't good enough. It was deemed to be an inadequate lesson, because. And whereas I thought it was an absolutely brilliant lesson. Kids were learning stuff. They were sort of bouncing ideas off one another. They were clearly enjoying being in the class. But so we were literally 4 grades apart, and I can't understand that. Another thing I went into, another joint observation, this brilliant maths teacher, but she was using, this was back in 2005 probably, and she was using a blackboard. She just didn't like the overhead projector. She didn't like the kind of computer, the new versions of whiteboards, etc. Very much blackboard, chalk and talk, showing kids how to do this cool maths, and all of them were like just loving it, got it, asking all the right questions. Brilliant lesson. Again, she got marked down for not sort of using the technology available. It's like, what? The kids are learning. Is that not what this is about? Yeah, it was a bizarre kind of bizarre moments of my career where you have these things thinking, am I missing something here? Kids are learning, and kids are enjoying being in the class, and you can see the kind of the interaction, the bond between the teacher and the students, and yet somebody's coming in here for not even for one day, for literally 20 minutes. They'll be in the classroom for 20 minutes and making this judgment and walking off, slipping the judgment under the door later saying, I thought you were rubbish. Something similar to that. If you get if your mark has been inadequate, to any teacher, that's crushing, absolutely crushing. And that's what Ofsted do. They come in and terrorize, and I'm not a fan. And the system needs to be reinvented. And what I would do is I get head teachers together and say, right then, you bang on about Ofsted not being fit for purpose and it not working. You tell us what we need to do to make sure that schools are able to be accountable. They can still be sort of, parents have the right, I think, to know what a school is like, the school that their child is going to be going to. So in year 7, and you're busy working out which school to send your child to, you need a bit of background. There needs to be some sort of, you don't buy something on from a company without potentially looking at the ratings at Trustpilot and what have you. It's no different. But the current system of rating is just not working.
Thank you. That's really useful. Ofsted, Office for Terrorising Teachers. Yeah.
I think it's something like that. I've not got any good stories to share, honestly. I don't get it.
No,
in any way, shape, or form.
My mother was a teacher. I think it was a private school, but they used to have Ofsted come in, and it was so stressful. Interestingly, I know they now have an Ofsted, but most private schools until recently didn't have an Ofsted. It was like, and I always found that it's like the curriculum that's placed from government down to the state schools, that doesn't happen in private schools. You can choose whatever curriculum you want.
Yeah, absolutely, including sports and arts massively. Yeah, I mean, in state schools, there's something called a Progress 8 measure, Attainment 8. There's all sorts of measures that a student, they do their SATs in year 6, and that basically governs what the student needs to get in year 11 to deem whether that school has done a good job or a bad job. And those 8 subjects basically comprise maths, English, and science. And a humanity or 2 humanities subjects, geography and history, for example. But the subjects like computer science, drama, art and design, whatever it is, those sorts of skills, or the subjects that most students just love doing, are not a focus. They don't play a huge part in that calculation. So schools are thinking, right then, if we're going to get better scores, we need to do more of the maths and the science and the English and less of this uncool stuff. We're going to get better grades. We're going to look better when we report these figures to the Department for Education. Let's go with that then. And that is another issue where this Progress 8 is kind of, it's almost a death knell. If you have a negative Progress 8 or Attainment 8 score, it causes significant problems. So it's gaming the system. Simple as that. It's like, what can we teach that's going to get us a better score to make these students look better across these core subjects, to make sure we get our figures up.
Which sounds ridiculous. So let's take away the subjects that make them feel happy, the arts, the CDTs, craft, design, technology, and let's just get them to do the subjects which they don't enjoy. I mean, you said something there about the classes which were really working with the kids are learning and enjoying the class.
Yeah.
It sounds like we're almost moving away from that.
Yeah.
The kids are not enjoying, their mental health is suffering because they don't enjoy it, they don't want to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, another thing. I'm not singling out boys here, but if I think boys are a better example of this. You know, when it comes to, certainly from my time anyway, when it comes to sports, there's a lot of boys who just love it. They just can't get enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
And being out on a football pitch or running around, just hooning, just getting rid of all that pent up energy.
Mm-hmm.
They absolutely love doing that. But there's less. That you still have to have 2 lessons of PE a week, but it used to be more. There used to be more resource put into it. And for some students, if you think about nowadays, a year 11 student, boy or girl, doesn't matter. If they are not particularly academic, but they enjoy enjoy the sporty side of things and the drama side of things and the things that are more interactive rather than just sitting there staring at a whiteboard listening to a teacher. Teaching stationary, so they're sat down and having to focus. A lot of kids don't learn like that, never have done, never will do, and yet more and more we're saying, these are the important lessons. Sit there and get on with it. Which to some students, particularly, I mean, ADHD is a huge issue these days.
Mm-hmm.
It was back, back in my time as well. It's been recognised for years, but I think more and more people are understanding about the impact it has on students, boys and girls, and just sitting there in a classroom, being quiet, listening to the teacher, making notes. It's a way of learning that so many students can't get on with these days, and state schools a lot of the time are not equipped to deal with those particular students.
That's fascinating. ADHD and that fact of having to sit still all the time. I worked in a forest school in Manchester a number of years ago, and I was working one-to-one with a young boy who'd been expelled from state school. He was in care and, been through quite a lot of trauma. An interesting Gabor Mate talks about that in his book. I think it's Scattered Minds, about the link between trauma and ADHD.
Mm.
And in the morning, the boy would come in and we'd have half an hour. He'd be dropped off and he would just run around the woods. Sometimes he'd come and say hello, but a lot of the time he's just racing around, this acre woodland. And, one day he didn't speak to me at all. He came up and after the half an hour and sat down and said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "Well, not so good. This morning I was pinned down to the floor in my home and, was restrained and I got really, really angry. And he said, just running around's really helped me release a lot of that tension and that stress I was feeling. So he said, I feel a lot better now. And he might have cried at that point. And I think we're just cutting all of these things out of modern education, that they can run around, they can just, even just, I think the developing child's mind, I think we've got to be in reverie as well. And just sitting and they get punished for that. Oh,
Yeah. I mean, to go back to the class of 30, you're sitting there as a teacher. You walk into the first lesson in the morning, kids all file through, some looking delighted with life, some looking a bit grumpy. I wouldn't want this, but to have a window on some of those students' lives, what the house that they come from, quite often not having had a breakfast, quite often probably not having any money for lunch either. They haven't quite sort of made it through to sort of the free school meal situation where the school will provide a meal, so they're sitting there hungry, and that evening before, yet the teacher's sitting there thinking that they know nothing of this, because when it comes to child protection issues, so a child who is vulnerable, teachers don't know about it. It's something that's dealt with behind the scenes, and rightly so. It's very rare a teacher will be told of a situation that's ongoing, because it's a need to know basis only, and what have you. And so you've got the class of 30. I can guarantee you in any well, certainly where I was teaching, in any class, 3 or 4 of the students have probably had a terrible evening, terrible morning.
Mm.
probably been bullied on the way into school, bullied in the playground, bullied on the way in through the door. And it's just, there's less resources there to deal with all of those issues that a modern secondary school teacher has to come across, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Apart from that,
So,
teaching is a brilliant job. If you're listening to this thinking it's just it needs some serious tweaks.
mm, yeah, I mean, I looked at going into teaching. It was more kind of working in alternative schools, but went to work at a primary school locally, and the teachers there said, just don't do it. Don't go anywhere near it. It's, and that was probably 2016,
Mm.
2017. So it had gone from, caring about emotions, and they said, new department of education comes in and says, oh, no, no, we're getting rid of that. So people who had got into the system because they were interested in these things, suddenly it changes.
Oh, I mean that reminds me about another thing that I may occasionally mention is that the changing curriculum. I don't know if government ministers do it just to annoy me personally, but as an IT teacher, there was something different every day that you had to do. A different course, a different, they would run something that was, we used to run a course that was worth 4 GCSEs, and from a results point of view, from the schools, we would game the system and we'd let every student do this and what have you. And then 5 minutes later, the government realised this is a stupid idea, and they would change it. So they bring something else in, IT related or business studies, or whatever. And so you've got to throw all your resources, lesson plans, the whole works in the bin, and start again. And as a teacher, as a head of department, you're not given time to do this. You are expected to carry on as you were. You might get a morning in September to sort of come up with a plan and what have you, but everything else is done in your own time, essentially. So you come up with a whole new scheme of work, and you dish it out to the teachers, and they do it for a year, and students would then take the exam a couple of years later. So literally have a 2-year run through, and then they get changed again. And that happened year on year on year on year on year. And that's a Department for Education thing, where they're coming up with these genius ideas, telling Ofqual what they need to do differently. And yeah, so it's a constant sort of changing of the guard, changing of the various curricula. I think less so now, but certainly, I think they realise that it's a workload issue. Every time you make any changes, the workload impact on teachers is enormous.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I'd love you to share a little bit about, what you do now and what you're seeing with teenagers and how you help them, not just with GCSEs, but I'm hearing mentally, emotionally. What?
We, as you said at the start, we run the parent guide to GCSE and the parent guide to post 16. So it is very much a parent centric business. So we're, if you think about, the contented little baby, all the various toddler books that parents can read and find out how to bring up a well-balanced child. It's, there's so many books on the market. It's fantastic. You're never wanting or lacking for information. When it comes to teenagers, who, let's be honest, are quite hard work and quite complex, as they go through puberty, the wheels often come off. There isn't any help for parents. So that's where we kind of, where we've started to help out. And so we do aim, most of what we do at helping parents understand what their teenagers are going through. And it's a membership that we run. And they can join in year 10, and hopefully they'll stay with us all the way through to year 13, where we help parents understand the trials and tribulations of applying for apprenticeships, applying for jobs, applying for university. Schools, if you think about a parents' evening, if anyone listening to this is a parent, you go into a parents' evening and you do get 5 minutes with the teacher. And it's a 5-minute max generally. And in the first 2 or 3 minutes, the teacher may well talk to you about the things that your child is studying. And we're doing sort of biology at the moment, and in biology, it's oxygen and blah 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 blah. It's the best I could come up with about biology. Goodness. And then 2 minutes maybe on how their behavior is, but there's nothing about what they can do to improve, and the sorts of things they should be studying, and when they should be studying, and when all the various exams are, and when how to prepare for mocks, how to prepare for the real thing. So we've put together this membership that essentially says, here are all the pinch points. Here's what you need to know as a parent of a year 10 student, of a year 11 student, of a year 13 about to take their finals, about to fill in their personal statement for university. We give them all the information they need, and we also do a sort of an online. So if they ever want to jump on a Zoom with us, discuss things, that's also part of it. We do stuff that is aimed at students as well. We do toolkits which are aimed at how to help your child revise better, and it's for the child to use this information and sort of make changes if necessary. It's been a fabulous journey. We're about 5 years in now.
Right.
And we started a business off in 2019. Aimed at parents and aimed at helping get better exam results. Seemed like a genius idea at the time, right up to the point where COVID hit and there weren't any exams for a couple of years. And but in a way it was good, because there were lots of government announcements about what was happening to do with exams and education during COVID and lockdowns, etc. And a lot of the time the announcements didn't make a huge amount of sense to parents. So we kind of spent a lot of time sort of undressing these announcements and explaining what it meant in sort of parent speak, I guess. And so once we got past that, things have been going much better, because obviously there are exams and there is a focus. Just building, loving creating resources, love our job, work at home. And I do think, I keep saying it, I think we've got the best job in the world. It's fabulous. We still do a lot of work with students. I do one-to-one sessions, not tutoring, more mentoring about if a student has issues, whether it's to do with the way they learn, whether it's to do with the issues they're having at school to do with mental health. I taught them how better to cope, whilst not being a counsellor. It's very clear to make sure that people understand. I will mentor students all day long, but I'm not a counsellor. So, and that's the one thing I miss from the classroom, is having that impact, that direct link with students. So lots of Zoom work, and sometimes the parents are there, sometimes it's just the student, but it's something that I do enjoy.
Thank you. Sounds like great work. And what's some of the results? What are some of the impacts on these young people?
Well, the impacts on the parents absolutely love us. And the feedback we get is brilliant. And it's so nice to, particularly on results day, whether it's year 11 or year 13, we're like, it's like just waiting for the baby to be born, waiting for the results to come through, waiting for the phone call, the email to say they got what they needed. They're now gone on to the next stage of their life. They're going on to the A-level BTEC courses they want to do. They've got their place at college. They've got their place at university. I absolutely love that. I spend quite a lot of time working with students, particularly at the moment, on their UCAS applications. Mm-hmm. And things like personal statements, it's the one page of A4 that you've got to write to a university to say this is why I'm amazing. And a lot of students don't really know why they're amazing, and so I help tease out the kind of the cool things that you've done. And they end up writing this kind of page and a bit of information that just makes them sound brilliant. And the gratitude once they've done that and sent their application off and got offers back, and they know exactly what they need to do to go to the next stage of their lives, it's brilliant. I just love that kind of that interaction, that feedback about how they've moved on and got what they needed. Occasionally we have a few kickbacks where students haven't quite got the grades, but I would always say to anyone, any student, any parent, grades absolutely don't define you. If there's a grade or an exam or a few exams that go wrong, it's fine. There's a solution. We can deal with it. The world is full of people who will happily say, I've stuffed up school and now look at me. I'm Alan Sugar's probably the best example. I don't think he even did A-levels. He just got a couple of CSEs and now he's worth $1 billion or whatever. So it's never a deterrent. It might put you back a year. You might have to retake. You might have to think about your path, think about what you were going to do and what you probably, there's always a way to get there, basically.
Thank you. I'd love for you to share a little bit. We're just coming towards the end, but I'd love you to talk about fathers, because the importance, we spoke last month, this idea of how we get fathers engaged more with their children.
Well, the easy answer, I would say, excuse me, is to join our membership. And bizarre, we've got the figures that 97% of our members are mums, and we're not happy about that. I don't know. It is what it is. We'd love for fathers to be more engaged and sort of spend more time engaging with our materials and working with us, me and my wife, to make sure that their teens have a better experience at school and at home. But at the moment we are on that 3% figure, and we're always looking to expand. When it comes to Facebook advertising, Facebook, anyone who's done any social media marketing knows that you can segment your audience. And because we don't have a huge budget on the marketing, we have to sort of spend more of our money than we'd like to, aiming it at mums rather than dads. But it's something where I think, dads, I would love them to be more involved. I'm a father who's been through a divorce with 2 kids involved. I hated the fact at the time you go into a court because there's an argument about custody, etc., and the automatic presumption is these children should be with the mum. That's how it is. That's the default option as you walk through the door. Excuse me. And I never understood it at the time. I still don't understand it now, even though I believe it's changing slightly. But it's that fathers need to be more involved to make for better outcomes for their children.
And how do we do that? How do we, I'm hearing, yes, join your program, but generally for fathers, sounds like, from when we spoke, and I see that, fathers are less engaged with their children, maybe more so when they're younger, but less so when they're older. What can we do to change that?
I mean, I suppose I'd come at from the angle. I mean, there are so many, unfortunately, broken homes these days where judges are made to make a decision as to where the child is going to spend the majority of their time. And I don't know the figures, but I dare say, it's going to be a 90-10 split, something along those lines, where the child will be every other weekend with the father and the majority of the time with the mother, until that starts to change, and it is taken on its merits, where it's just a straight split down the middle, or quite often maybe the father is the better parent to go and spend the majority of the time with. Until that changes, as the kind of go-to option for any judge, I think it's going to be tricky. And to this day, the impact that judge had on my life by ruling as it should be a 50-50 split is huge. Most important day of my life, bar none, to this date, was that ruling where, yes, I think this should be a shared care 50-50. Let's just get on with it. Bring them both up. We had twins. As best you can between the two of you, rather than this kind of constant bickering and one has all the time and one has no time. It's not a model that should be followed. So
thank you. That's really useful to hear, Paul. Thank you.
I didn't quite get around to scaling Big Ben and Fathers for Justice side of things, but it was getting to that point. If I'd lost, I'd have been so bitter, and to this day would be so bitter. And I know fathers who went through exactly the same thing as me. They didn't get the ruling that I got, and sure enough, once every other weekend for a day, if they're lucky. And it's just no way to give the child a balanced upbringing, in my opinion.
Thank you. So as we just start to wrap this conversation up, we've been talking about an hour now, so it does seem to go quickly. Is there any final bits you'd like to add in? Your message about education, what needs to change, or anything else?
I think in terms of parents getting involved with schools, I think it is important to, from my time as a teacher, I think I always did better with students who I was in contact with the teachers, and there was a constant flow of information. So I knew what was going on behind the scenes. If there was an issue, teacher would have told me, and I was more aware of how to deal with that particular child on that particular day or week or month. And I do think that communication is something that it doesn't take a lot of time out of a teacher's day, and it certainly doesn't take a lot of time out of a parent's day to contact individual teachers. If there is an issue, rather than waiting for parents' evening and then saying, "Well, I want to talk to you," contact the teacher and discuss it, because there are always two sides for every story. Trust me. And all too often, parents aren't seeing that side. So I think more interaction between parents and schools is going to help. And schools, I think parents have to be proactive, because schools don't have necessarily the resources to do it the other way around. I mean, for example, I talked about parents' evenings. More parents' evenings would be brilliant, but it just simply can't happen because demands on teacher time. It isn't one of the options. So going direct to the teacher and having those discussions where there is an issue is really, really important, and just doesn't happen enough.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. So how do people find out more about you? You've got a website.
I mean, parentguidetoeducation.com is our kind of our umbrella website, but you can also find parentguidetopost16.com, parentguidetogcse.com, or you can email me. I'd love to hear from people. Paul at parentguidetogcse.com. I love talking education. And my wife, she's the media kind of, or generally the media sort of part of the partnership. She's done a bit of Good Morning Britain and does all the radio shows. That she's done a bit of Nikki Campbell, a bit of BBC radio. So she is always happy to talk on anything to do with education, particularly from the parent point of view. So
great. Okay, I'll put that out. So Paul at parentguidetogcse.com, parentguidetogcse.com, and parentguidetoeducation.com as well. And I'll put in that. So thank you so much for your time. And
really enjoyed. There's so many different issues to do with education. It's such a complex business, I guess. I do enjoy talking about the brilliant aspects of it, but also the things that need to probably change over the next year or three.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your work, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.